Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
Your co-host, Rich Gear, here as well. And Doug, I'm kind of excited. We're going to be talking about something near and dear to your heart and mine as well. And it's actually a book that we've named our show after. Or, yeah, I guess the book came first, so Doug, that would have to be it.
That's the title of our TV show, Revolution Against Evolution. That's the title of this book, Revolution Against Evolution. Now, this is actually the fourth edition, and I'll show you what the first edition looked like. This was published in 1986. This is obviously a self-published work, and though it wasn't all that good looking, we'd actually printed 2,500 copies of this.
It's interesting though, Doug, because there were several people that really said it was very influential in their young life, when they had read it, and they said, and what I liked about this book and the several incarnations afterward, is that the second one or the third one?
This is the second one.
Second one, okay.
The third one was online.
Ah, that's right. Yep.
And so now we have the 2020 version, which is we're just announcing. This will be coming out in the next week or so. I'll have it available on our website. And this book was first published. This was the first edition published in 1986. And so there's been a lot of things going on in the world of creation. This book, this one was published in 1993. It's gone through 5,000 copies. And so now it's... and I was debating for a while of reprinting it, and so we, Kirby Riles is a friend of ours who has been helping me put this together and encouraged me to reprint it because he needs it. So there's still a need to have a general creation book that people can, an easy read that people can look at and get the high points and the arguments that we talked about in the original book. And most of everything in the original book was valid, and a lot of the things that I speculated on in the first book was established by further evidence.
Oh, you got a particular example in mind? Or I'm putting you on the spot here. Sorry about that. But.
Yeah, the particular example was, we in the original book I talked about the Joggins fossils, Polystrate fossils.
Okay, yeah.
Well, we went out and saw them.
Yes.
Larry and I went out.
Yeah, I didn't get to go with that particular trip. I'd like to, but they're Polystrate fossils. So, and that's in this book, and you got some pictures of it.
Yeah.
What's neat about Polystrate fossils, I've always found fascinating, is how it really shows that these layers were laid down, had to be laid down fairly quickly.
Right.
And they had to be laid down when they were soft, not basically there and then 100,000 years or 2 million years or whatever, and layers built up slowly and gradually. Because these tree trunks are like embedded throughout the whole thing.
And what they're fossil lycopods, and they're
that's right.
They're kind of like big, huge reeds, is what they were
in Joggins. Yeah,
Joggins, and so the Joggins fossils are really interesting because it represents layers of 18,000 foot of strata.
Wow.
And
okay.
So that's significant, and they're tilted. Go down the coastline, and they're tilted towards the Bay of Fundy.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And so, and then what's interesting is that the top of them is sheared off flat, totally flat.
Okay.
And so what it indicates is that these layers were laid down in a single event with all these fossil trees in there. Some of them are upside down.
And that really messes things up.
Ian Juby shows that a lot of them, what they thought was tree roots, they were actually tree branches coming from the top. And
that's fascinating.
So he's really showed in his videos how this is really evidence that something very catastrophic took place.
Yeah.
And so, this is actually giving us an idea of the extent of the flood of Noah.
Yeah, and what's interesting, this latest incarnation of the book, Doug he's added some new things to it,
Right.
upgraded some things. But it's fascinating, Doug, how all the arguments, or maybe not all of them, but the vast majority of the ones you wrote down in 1986 are still good today. They still hold up very well, and they still are they're very confounding to an evolutionary scenario.
For example, along those lines is a section I have on radioisotope dating. And I don't get into depth like Timothy Clary does in his new book, Carved in Stone, which just came out in March this year. But
and that book's a tome, right?
Yeah, it's a beautifully illustrated 700-page book, I think.
Wow. Okay.
But I was looking at that and checking some of my stuff over with, and I made a couple of changes and referenced this book. Actually, these are two proof copies. So this is copy number 1 and copy number 2 here. I've got an order in for copy number 1 already. So, what he had said in his book was that there's very good evidence that the chemistry of the isotopes help determine the age, not the radioactivity of it. Because so
explain the difference between what you're saying. That might be important, for.
Well, that's what I'm about to do.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was doing that.
I didn't see. You're getting too long. You're taking too long to get to it. So get to the point.
The point is that water action will skew the dates, and that's because of the chemistry of the alkali metals like rubidium and potassium. Are very highly soluble in water, and they're the parent elements.
Even
uranium is highly soluble in water. Uranium salts. It's the ions that tend to migrate, and so and in difference to the daughter elements like strontium, the rubidium strontium method. The strontium is less soluble because they're alkali earth metals. And they have a double charge rather than a single charge, and the double charge makes it stronger in the ionic bond to its compound component.
So the parent element is much more fugitive as far as longevity.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
And there was I had read about an experiment that was done where they took a sample, did the potassium argon date on it, and then ran water over it.
Really? Okay.
And it raised the age of the rock that they got.
Right in front of them, huh?
Yeah. So
wow.
So it's sort of a and we know that a lot of the radioisotope dates are all over the map. Where we have ages of known lava flows that were dated that
we've known that for many years.
That date in the millions of years. So we know when these actually took place. The one was Sunset Crater, where the Hopi Indians actually witnessed the eruption, and yet the radioisotope dates are in the millions of years.
There's stories even in the Grand Canyon where their ancestors, they believe they saw Grand Canyon form. So that really, unless you want to discount every Native American story as legend, myth, or fabrication. There were eyewitness accounts of these things in mankind's memory, and this would have been definitely flood or post-flood times. Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to that I put in from Timothy Clary's book was referenced was that he believes that the overthrust, the areas where the fossils are out of order, actually represent real rock movements, and he says that the seismic data from the oil and gas leasing that he used to work for sort of bears that out. The only thing is that this represents some massive amounts of rock movement, and I still find it very difficult to believe that the 50-mile wide like 300-mile long overthrust at the Lewis overthrust,
Right.
moved 50 miles to the east without making, it looks like this was water deposited on top of each other, because they dug out the contact line, and this is like a straight line.
Mm-hmm.
And so with,
Right.
and so you would expect rock breccia and slick and slides and gouge of that sort, representing those layers between them. And he says that's they've worked out a model where they think that's still possible.
Does he actually think it was rock moving on top of rock, or was it still in a fairly liquid state?
It had to be in a liquid state.
So it really wasn't technically rock at that time. It would have been more like sediment, and then it becomes
Right.
lithified later on. It becomes solidified later on when the pressure. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm going to have to read his stuff a little
Check
bit
it out,
more
make
and
sure,
check
yeah.
it out. But I'm just acknowledging that there are creationists that believe that those represent real overthrusts, and so it doesn't detract from the argument, because what it shows is that this is only possible within a flood model. It's not something that we could actually do 1 inch at a time over millions of
No,
years.
that's really untenable.
Because the driving force for the overthrust would have had to have been massive in order for it to do its work. And so if you take 2 rock layers and try to push it down the street, you're going to get some resistance.
You're going to get, it's like, think what happened with sandpaper over wood, or even it roughs it up and scrapes it. Well, imagine rock upon rock, the scraping that would happen in that regard.
Right.
If it didn't tear everything up, period, you just should find at least a lot of evidence, like you said, breccia, slick and slides. You should see striations of some sort,
Right.
some kind of evidence of rock upon rock movement, because there are small areas where that kind of stuff has actually happened. You can see all that stuff, but they're small. They're little. Relatively speaking,
But I did want to go through a little bit of the contents of what this book is going to talk about. I've written a new introduction to it because I talk a little bit about my whole experience with this, why I ended up in this whole scenario where I've tried to figure out these things for myself when I was in college. And there's I started out with a chapter called Order from Disorder, and that's talking about the second law of thermodynamics, where you have there is a law that energy really cannot be created, in a scenario.
Right.
Where the first law of thermodynamics is energy or matter cannot really be created or destroyed.
Yeah.
The second one is that the energy will go from a higher state to a lower state. And I've outlined what those laws are. The first law is when energy passes as work or as heat or with matter in and out of a system, the system's internal energy changes in accordance with the law of conservation of energy. Perpetual motions of the machines of the first kind are impossible. The second is in the natural thermodynamic process, the sum of the entropies of interacting thermodynamic systems increases.
What does that mean?
Entropy is the disorder.
Right. From order to disorder.
Order to disorder. The third law is the entropy of a system approaches a constant value as the temperature approaches absolute zero.
What, heat death?
Yeah. And then there's the zeroth law.
I know that's something new.
It says in two systems are in thermal equilibrium with a third system. They're in thermal equilibrium with each other. And that one's sort of moot, but it's actually used to prove the first law.
Oh, yeah, that's why they felt I know, I read about that. That's why they felt they needed to come up with that. But
the problem is that it's easier to take a jigsaw puzzle and
blow it apart
than to put it back together.
Yeah.
And I have
putting them together takes a lot of intelligence, and you have to really constantly make it happen. That goes into the intelligent design argument, Doug,
Exactly.
for our universe, that things that are put together in seemingly amazing order or like you mentioned in the book. I remember the one thing I like, and this is dealing with the cosmology, the one thing that's really amazing is that the Earth, Moon, and Sun are in a perfect ratio for eclipses and stuff, you know?
Right.
And I mean, that just, it seems like, I like the point you put in there. It's like, you know, he created the sun, moon, and stars for signs and seasons. Is this one of the signs that there's a God who's in control of the universe, that you could have actually the exactly ratio for distance to create?
Yeah, you can have a total eclipse.
Yep,
And
that's amazing.
It's really nowhere in the universe that is possible. Now, next, I talked about the geology stuff, and there's a lot of things where I talk a lot about these overthrusts, and that's still a valid thing to talk about, because one dilemma, and I stumped this with Kurt Wise because he's proposing that these overthrusts are real. I said, what about this situation in near Las Vegas, where you've got Red Rock Canyon and Valley of Fire, two different rock structures with the same out-of-order sequence,
right,
75 miles apart. And the top layer is Cambrian, then Jurassic, Triassic, Permian in both spots. It seems like the same event created this, and it would have had to have been a massive event.
Yes.
And to me, it looks like these things are laid down and water deposited in the order that they are at. And so that's the difficulty with that. I'm still a little skeptical of Timothy Clary's and some of the creationist assertion that these are real, but they have to be something flood related. And so it helps to put the flood in perspective.
Yep, you still have good arguments in there about upside down or dinosaur tracks with humans. You still have a lot of the good things dealing with animal evolution. I think the stuff that was in the original, those people who have read the book, who liked that stuff is really still in there. He's just updated some things and added some things that really make it even more, I think, more interesting.
Yeah. But in most cases, we've been there now. And
that's the difference. We have been there.
The Sturkfontein Caves, when we're talking about the ape men fossils, that was another thing where we actually went and saw a place where Australopithecines were found, and really verified our assertion that these are ape fossils, not men.
Right.
And so as an extinct ape. And so we also have a chapter on animals that could not have evolved.
Yeah, always like that.
I've got this one of the anglerfish and the archerfish and the anableps, the genus of fish that has eyes that are split in half.
Yeah, one to see above the water, and then one that adapts for the refraction of the under the water. That's amazing, Doug. At the same time, you know.
And I talk about the links of all the different design features of the frog that shows that all of these the different things are linked together. You can't have one without the other. It's a chicken and egg problem. All of this stuff is chicken and egg problems. I changed the order of a couple of the chapters. I talked about proteins, DNA in the cell, and it's talking about the odds of a protein coming about by chance.
Do you put the tail of the snail in there, or do you got?
I got the snail, tail of the snail.
Tail of the snail, yeah. That's still a good story, you know. It really is.
Yeah, the chances of it are sort of like a snail having the job of moving the Earth to the other side of the universe and back one molecule at a time.
Yeah.
And moving at a rate of 1 millimeter in a million years. And at the same time, you have a protein factory making proteins at the rate of 400 tons a second. And by the time you fill up the universe with proteins, you get one viable protein. The snail will have done his job and done it pretty good. So maybe started on the next route. So
yeah.
So this is an argument I use. I think is an excellent one, and it's just using the one problem of left-handed, right-handed amino acids, which it has not been refuted. It's been something that is actually, I think evolutionists have given up to create life in the test.
There's another one that's kind of interesting, but it's like it deals with like the sugars or something. They're all right-handed or something.
Sugars are right-handed. Fats are conformed in the cis configuration of the trans configuration. The trans is a lower energy than the cis, and so but the cis configuration is what is used in life. And so,
and that's more complicated. It should be equal or even more on the other one.
Right.
The lower one. Okay.
Right. And so these types of things are problems that evolutionists haven't solved.
And we believe they never will.
No.
Even with their just so stories, Doug, which the evolutionists are geniuses at coming up and concocting scenarios and probability things. They're really a lot of fairy tales. I mean, I love the idea of like, it's sort of glib, I realize it, but when you say, what's a fairy tale? A princess kisses a frog and she turns into a handsome prince. But science is, a princess waits 1 million years or 2 million years, and the frog turns into a handsome prince, And to me, it is a little glib, but it shows you the fancifulness. I mean, Doug, I'm always amazed at how everything in science disproves spontaneous generation, and yet for you to even get out of the box for evolution, you have to implore, you have to utilize spontaneous generation. Something non-living has to become alive. It has to be done through natural processes. Now, we as creationists do believe that a non-living thing became living, but it was through an agency called God. Okay, He breathed into the earth, and man became a living soul. But there's an intelligence, a design factor from an external source that has caused this to happen. Properties inherent in matter never create anything but what it is. They never change anything. And those are things I think are amazing when we deal with it. But what I like about your book, Doug, is, and I read it many years ago, and I've read the incarnations of it and stuff like that, is it continues to be not only remain valid, but it's also simple, and I don't mean simplistic, but simple enough so a lay reader can read this and get something in a quick bite. And it invites you. You got pretty good footnotes here at the end. It invites you to look up stuff if you want to get more in depth of stuff. But there's all kinds of resources out there.
Yeah, we have all our videos listed. A lot of our videos listed in this book, which is what we've done after the first edition. Now, it's interesting. My very first edition was what David DeWitt picked up at Michigan State University years ago, and he became a creationist as a result. And now he got his doctorate, and he's working at Liberty University, and he's really a powerful witness for creation, and it started with this one.
Yeah, he's one of the guys I was referring to that were affected by the book.
Now, I also talk about creation models and stars and planets, and there are a lot of different things that we haven't got figured out yet. There's
no, we're honest enough to tell you that. Okay,
so it's something that is difficult for us to say that we can go back in time and actually rerun the history to figure out what actually happened.
What they are useful for, Doug, and I think you point that out, is the fact that there are explanations. We don't know if these are the explanations. So you put several scenarios. I like the Setterfield and the white hole cosmology when you deal with cosmology, and the idea of the decay of the speed of light, things. There are ideas of that nature.
Well, let me explain that, because people, if you just mention names...
I only said that to say that there are several things in this book. I was talking about the book that helps remove some obstacles to old universe, young universe. If you want to explain more into the depth of it, that's fine. I wasn't trying to go there. I was just trying to say there are things in the book that really deal with those issues on a level that's understandable to a lay reader, and I think that's what we do.
I try to take the complicated stuff and make it a little bit simple.
Yeah, distill it down.
Yeah, because if you're talking about starlight and time and Einstein's theory,
and all that
stuff,
gets into it.
It becomes difficult to understand, but I try to distill it down to a point where most of the lay readers are able to take it up and fix it.
Yeah, and for those who are astrophysicists or physicists or whatever, you can go into depth because there are creationist writings dealing with all of these things, but this can point you to that and maybe open up a fog or an obstacle, if you will. By the way, Doug, I mean, that's what we do in our show all the audience. That's what we do in our show all the time. We are not here trying to be the most in-depth person on any particular subject. We are more generalists because there's a lot of subjects that evolution and creation touch on.
Yeah.
And I have been the first one to say no one can know everything about everything, okay? But you can point out flaws, arguments, or corroborations, whichever side of the argument you're going. And it seems to come down more and more and more on the side of creation, not evolution.
Exactly.
But this book is a good start for those who are not familiar with the arguments, or maybe who are a little bit intimidated. People who are in the church, maybe, who don't really know how to talk about this, Doug, and yet it's become a stumbling block. Maybe your kids are going to college and they're getting bombarded with stuff like that. A book like this is very helpful for that kind of stuff. And,
at the end of it, I have 2 chapters. One, issues and answers, so some of the common arguments, and then some arguments that you shouldn't use. And so we're about ready to get to the end of this.
Yeah, I just want to go down a little bit of a list real fast, if we could tell people what talked about in this book. Geology, common arguments, dinosaurs, early man, mutations, origin models, stars and planets, creation models, thermodynamics, proteins, DNA, cells, and radioisotope dating. If that doesn't cover most of the questions you're going to have, really nothing will.
And we even talk about what happened with Cain's wife. So.
Oh, yeah, some theological arguments. Great stuff.
So we'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution. Buy this book. It's going to be available soon on rae.org. And the price we're going to put on this is $9.95, cheap. So look us up and get a copy. And we'll see you next time.